thank you very much for coming along today. As well as being leader of the City Council, I'm, like all councillors in the city, a ward councillor, and welcome to my ward because Oxford Brookes University is in fact in my ward. Wards in the city are not huge, they're quite small actually. They're about 4,000 homes, about 6,000 people. One of my duties as a ward councillor is to listen to all the views of the people that I represent. And in common with many other people who have a similar role to me, I go around and I knock on doors. That's the best way we find of making sure that we get a really representative views of the people that we are representing. So when I'm going out and talking to people, there was one road which I often used to go down that I was rather dreaded going down. And the reason for that was because there seemed to be a disproportionate number of dogs on this road. Now, I don't dislike dogs, but you have to understand that for a local councillor, actually going up to a door and not really quite knowing what's behind it, but suspecting there might be a dog, is sometimes a bit of a difficult issue, particularly if people aren't in and you've got to put a calling card through the letterbox. There was one house on this particular road, and I could never, unfortunately, remember which one it was. Wherever I put my hand through that letterbox, I'd bring my hand back and it was wet. I don't know why. I don't know why that should be, but I think that dog really liked that letterbox. I reckon it sucked that letterbox. So that was not a pleasant experience. But that was possibly better than the doors where there were silent dogs behind them. And the first you knew about it was you'd put your hand through and there'd be hot breath on your fingers. And you brought your fingers back pretty quickly because you didn't want to lose them. So, you know, I was never very keen on actually going down this particular road. But, you know, so be it. Now, I was a councillor for 12 years, and then I took 7 years to have my 2 children, just do the day job and not be a councillor. And then I came back after 7 years to represent the same ward again. So back down this particular street, and I'm thinking, oh, well, back down to see the dogs again. And I went down, and I got all the way to the end of the street, and I was like, this is a bit strange. There are no more dogs on this street. Well, very few anyway. What's happened? What's changed in the 7 years? And it took me a while to realise what had changed. And what had changed was not the families, because actually most of the families were still the same sorts of families that had lived there before. But what had changed was the kind of homes that they were living in. When I first represented that area, most people owned their homes or they lived in council homes. And now, a large proportion of people in that street were living in private rented accommodation. What does private rented accommodation mean? No dogs, no landlords like dogs. So that meant that they'd had to change the way that they lived their lives. They had less security in their properties. Now, 5 years further on, that road has changed yet again. It's quite different now. Those families are going. Some of them have already gone. They're moving out to other bits of Oxfordshire, to towns like Didcot, Bicester, Abingdon, you'll be familiar. And they've gone because their landlords have realised that they can get more money by renting those properties to people like you. Young professionals, students, you can get more people into the houses and they'll make more money. And unfortunately, this is a picture we're seeing across the whole city. Fewer and fewer family houses left for local people to live in. So this is a really big challenge for us. I mean, Oxford is a fantastic city, but it is not a fair city. And one of the things that we set about trying to do as a city council was to try and think about how we could create a fairer city. So what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is Oxford 2050, the vision, which is what we set out to do, which was to try and think about what we would like to see in our city in 2050. So first of all, we had to think, you know, how do you think about a city? You know, if we're trying to sort of create a vision for 2050, what would it look like? How do you even start the process of thinking about what a city looks like? Who do we ask? And actually, of course, in terms of asking, well, Oxford, there's probably more experts per square mile than pretty much anywhere else in the world. So that was quite easy. And we have some very expert people in the City Council, but even more expert people out there in our two fantastic universities. But also, there were other people who are particularly expert in Oxford, and that is our local residents. So we were delighted that we had 600 people respond to us and give us their ideas and their thoughts. And actually, a lot of them were children. And that was important because in 2050, they're going to be our future. So, those are the people who will be living, and I hope, and working and enjoying our city in 2050. So we wanted to make sure that we were thinking about what we wanted from our city, for our city. We know we've got a divided city. We know that there are people in our city who've been lucky, who've got money, secure housing, who've had opportunities, education, and we know there are others who have not, who have had real difficulties, people like a lot of my constituents, some of whom are having 2 or 3 jobs just to kind of keep a roof over their heads, feed their families, and clothe their families, and haven't had the same opportunities in life. We don't want to see that being replicated into the future. We want a different approach for our city. So what did we do when we first got people together and started thinking about what do we want for the city in the future? I mean, first of all, how do you even think about a city? What makes up a city? Is it the buildings? Is it the skyline? Oxford has a very famous skyline. You may have seen some stuff about it. There's bits of it behind me on the screen. Is it the people or is it the streets? And of course, actually, in a sense, it's all of those things. And you can imagine there was a lot of debate about what we should be putting into our vision. And in the end, we came up with 5 key themes: people and communities, culture and leisure, work and learning, the built and natural environment, and transport and connectivity. Now, that's not perfect. There's a lot of overlap, and there's also, there's gaps there as well. But we felt that was quite a good way of trying to sort of get it into manageable chunks that we could actually talk about. So the next challenge, once we'd sort of described Oxford as it pretty much is now, was what's it going to look like in 32 years' time? I don't know. I don't know if you know. We had to do a bit of guesswork on that, but we also wanted to project what we wanted it to look like in 32 years' time. So we got all those people together, we got their ideas, and actually there was a huge amount in common. What was really gratifying was that lots of people had a lot of very similar ideas. People looked at the problems that we had, and they said, actually, what we want in the future is a fairer city. And they agreed a lot about the solutions, and they agreed a great deal about they came to very much the similar conclusions. So it was relatively easy, bearing all of that in mind, to come up with a fairly coherent vision, which is this document. It's on the website if you want to have a look at it. So what does the vision look like? I hear you ask. So broadly, it's about what kind of city we want to live in. A tolerant one that's welcoming, one that's clean and safe, with opportunities for all, but still recognisably Oxford. Obviously, we have the dreaming spires of Oxford, we have iconic architecture, we have beautiful green spaces and waterways, and we have to protect all of that for future generations. We need to maintain that uniqueness but we also need to make sure that we make it fairer. It's important for us that everybody gets to enjoy our city. So our starting point was now, here and now. What do we have already in our city? Well, yes, we have this beauty, but we also have toxic levels of air pollution. And not everyone is able to enjoy every aspect of our city. And our biggest problem is a chronic lack of space. We are a very constrained city, constrained by greenbelt all around us, and it is obviously fairly difficult to build in large parts of our city. And by 2050, we're anticipating a 25% increase in our population. So, what does the vision end up describing, this vision of a city? As I'm here at Brookes today, I thought it would be a good place to start by talking about work and learning. So in terms of work and learning, the vision said what we want for people is an aspiration for everybody to be able to have a good job. Not just a good job, but a well-paid job that enables them to live in a comfortable manner. We know, though, that one of the biggest issues facing employment in this country is automation. It's possible that Oxford is one of the best places in the country to actually tackle that, because actually we're leading in Oxford in terms of developing ways of doing automation well and creating jobs from it. So actually we decided to make that a focus of some of the work that we're doing, because we're conscious that even though across the whole of the country it is reckoned that about 1 in 3 jobs may be lost through automation, in Oxford that's fewer, possibly 13% still is a significant figure. So we want to make sure that we have a knowledge-based economy, make the most of the fact that we have got this fantastic resource here and build on it. But we need to make sure that opportunities to get involved in that are available to everybody. So everybody has access to lifelong learning and good quality education. That is very, very important to us, because we know that that hasn't always been the case in our city, and some of our poorest citizens have the least access to the best education, even though we're here in this city with 2 fantastic universities. So how are we going to get around in 2050? That's another key question. I have to say, nearly all of the children responding to our survey seem to think it was hoverboards, but I'm not sure about that. I would just like to, at this point, just ask people a quick question about how they got here today. So could you stick your hands in the air if you either walked or cycled here today? Excellent. Well done. That was probably a majority of people here. And what about, who came here by public transport, bus, train, taxi? Another substantial. And who came by private car? Not very many of you. Well, my challenge is to keep that sort of proportions in both your behaviour, as you know, for the rest of your lives, in terms of your journeys, but also to try and get everybody in the city having those sorts of patterns of journeys. Because what we do know is that we have those historic levels of air pollution in our city, and we know that that is literally killing people. So we want to make sure that we are having better ways of using the space and getting around in it. And that is what we're talking about in our vision. So we want to make sure that people can travel around our streets, but we know there are real challenges. We have a medieval city centre, we have rivers, we have floodplain, we have narrow terrace streets, we have lots and lots of cars still at the moment. So getting from where we are now to where we want to be in 2050 is going to be a real challenge. And it may require some controls on people using cars, which will not be popular. It was very interesting to hear earlier on about hydrogen cars, and we've also been looking at electric cars. We're hoping in the city centre to create the world's first zero-emission zone, testing out the different ways in which we can explore travel for the future, so that in the future, our streets will not be dominated by cars and polluting vehicles, but will actually be places which people can enjoy, but move around. So, the next part of the vision was the built environment. And this was possibly the biggest challenge of all, because this is about housing. So, how do we protect the best parts of our city, but actually make sure that you can afford to live here without having to win the lottery? And believe you me, to buy houses in large parts of the city, you really would have to win the lottery too. And in fact, frankly, you probably wouldn't be able to afford much even then. So we need to get more housing. Everybody deserves to have a house and to be able to live within reasonable distance of the place that they work. So we need to look at different ways of achieving this. We obviously want to also tackle to reduce air pollution. We've talked about that, but we need to make sure that we don't turn Oxford into a museum, even when we are preserving the architecture. We need to build at greater density, and we need to look at our city limits. We are constrained at the moment by Greenbelt, but we know that actually some of the most sustainable ways of building communities would be to just extend our boundaries to a small amount and reduce the number of journeys that people are making currently. Because at the moment, large numbers of people are commuting those long distances into the city, lots and lots of them in private cars, as opposed to having better public transport links or being able to cycle or walk to work if their communities were a little bit closer to the city. So that's something that we want to see happen and that we are talking to local authorities surrounding us about and putting into our local plan documents. But all of this is really about people, and it's about their and our communities. So the city is where people live happy and fulfilled lives, we hope, enjoying their homes, their work, and their leisure. So our vision overall is to improve access to housing, to get transport right, to build homes that people want and deserve and need, and to make really good use of our precious space in this city. We need to reduce pollution. We need to encourage walking and cycling. And if we do all of those things and get them right, we hopefully will have a healthier population as well, because all of those things should also improve people's health. So we want a happy and healthy Oxford. All of our people able to enjoy the rich cultural life that is on offer in this city, but at the moment is all too often only available to a privileged few. And the City Council does its best to try and make sure that those people who are less advantaged in our city are able to take advantage of some of those cultural offers, but you know, it actually needs to be something that people are able to take advantage of. So over the next few decades, we will be working to deliver our vision for Oxford 2050. We're already beginning to put elements of that vision into key documents that the City Council produces, like the local plan. There will be developments, we hope, in both North and West Oxford that will be building already on our knowledge economy, trying to build businesses and homes together and create new sort of powerhouses around the knowledge economy. And we're working as well with Milton Keynes and Cambridge, who have very similar economies to ours, very much based around knowledge economy. And you'll have perhaps heard of the Oxford-Cambridge corridor, which isn't, as it sounds, a sort of like some kind of bizarre corridor, but actually more of a sort of mythical structure at the moment. It's not a structure. It's about trying to sort of draw together the different aspects of industry, the economy, the academic institutions, but also to improve the transport network, particularly the public transport network between those different cities. So make sure that we are in a good place to face the future in 2050. So I've talked a bit about how we also want to, in transport, look at ways of reducing the use of private cars in the city. And also the types of pollution. So we're obviously looking at things like electric vehicles and indeed hydrogen to try and help tackle air pollution. So I think that the key thing is that in 2050, I'm going to be 80. And I really hope at that point I have retired from the City Council and indeed retired from all of my jobs. But at that point, I hope that we will have built some of the foundation stones for the vision that we're trying to create here. Maybe I'll be riding around Oxford at that point on an electric bike. It's possible. I've tried one out, and I quite recommend them. They're particularly good for getting up big hills, and we have got a few of those in the city. So maybe I'll be visiting my grandchildren here at Oxford Brookes, which would be fantastic, and I'd be very proud to come and visit them here. And if I do, it would be really lovely to be able to pop round the corner, go back to my old ward, and hopefully hear some dogs barking, because hopefully at that point people might actually have homes which they can call homes and look after as their homes rather than temporary accommodation owned by private landlords. So Oxford 2050 is a vision for Oxford City, but it's a blueprint. It's something that we hope to see in the next 32 years, but we're only just starting on it, and we can't do this on our own. In 2050, you'll be in your 50s. You'll be raising families, maybe in Oxford, maybe in another city. You'll be at the peak of your careers. You'll be leaders in your field. Engineering, planning, business, politics maybe. Maybe in 32 years' time, one of you will be standing up here as leader of Oxford City Council. I hope so, and I hope that if you are, that you'll already be thinking about 2080, because you'll need to be thinking ahead for the next 32 years. So, although we're beginning the steps to take towards 2050 now, it's not really going to be for us to completely deliver on this. It's your generation that's going to need to do the work on this. It's going to be your project to finish. It's for you to inspire and achieve the real change. So thank you. Thank you in advance for helping make Oxford and cities around the world the best that they can be. Thank you for making Oxford and cities around the world the very, very best places that you and I want to live in. A fairer, better society. Thank you.